very, very warm welcome to the Women in Transport Autumn reception. Yet again, I look around the room and I say, wow, it's fantastic. We've got so many people here. It's absolutely brilliant. So thank you for coming. Huge thanks also to Isabel Dedring and the Arup team for hosting us in this fantastic venue. So thank you very much. We've really enjoyed working with you on putting together what promises to be a very interesting panel debate, and now made even more interesting as we have a bonus new panel member this evening, Mark Lomas from HS2. Thank you so much for joining at the last minute as well, so brilliant, thank you. So to get the conversation started, I'd love to share with you some thoughts on whether women in transport are nearly there yet. For women in transport, the EU statistic of the representation of women in the transport industry that we generally use as our baseline is 22%, which is an EU calculated statistic. Frustratingly, that number actually went back 1 percentage point last year. So I think we can safely say, in a word, no, we are not nearly there yet. However, this is far from a tale of woe. If I compare the conversations that our members and steering group were having 5 years ago with where we are today, we've actually come an incredibly long way. Instead of discussing how rubbish it is to be the only woman in a meeting, we're talking about the contributions we're making to transport planning, to design and delivery in the UK today, and what more we have to give. It was such a buzz this week listening to one of my graduates waxing lyrical about Rachel Skinner. She's one of our past presidents who's now set to become the president of the ICE in 2020. She'd been speaking about automated vehicles at an infrastructure summit, and I'm also really pleased to have the pleasure to be working with ladies such as Emma Gilthorpe leading the Heathrow expansion programme. So yes, actually, progress must be happening. So why isn't this being reflected in the statistics? I have a theory. You'll see on your seat a brilliant little handout kindly provided by monster.com setting out women's legal journey to equality in the UK since 1870. I hope that's going to provide you with some insight for the conversation this evening. But now, as every good transformation manager knows, comes the hard bit. Changes in perceptions, behaviours and societal culture that are going to make us truly inclusive. So I'll tell you a little story. On Saturday morning, my phone buzzed. I had a WhatsApp from a dear friend on one of what I affectionately call my mummy groups. Do you follow this blog? She said. It's so funny. Happy face, happy face, happy face, right? So, but this time I read it and somehow this time it just didn't feel funny anymore. It was a mum writing about how useless her male partner was at doing the household tasks, written in a comical style. But actually, I read it and personally felt quite offended. I thought it was quite offensive to men, if I'm being honest, and I passed it to my husband. I looked at him and said, read that and tell me what you think. And he said, rolled his eyes and looked at me and goes, oh yeah, we're all useless, aren't we? And I just feel that it's time that the boardroom and the work environment is actually really starting to think about inclusivity and reaching out to a broader audience. But I don't see being done enough in society as a whole. And I'm talking about outside the work environment as well as in it. So I'm hoping that I simply live in a small suburb that just really hasn't brought itself into the 21st century yet. But I have a horrible feeling that I don't. And the call to action that I would really love to see come out of this evening is that we actually start making much, much, much more effort about engaging men in the conversation on gender equality. So tonight, rather than being critical of the transport industry for not doing enough, I would like to say thank you to the industry. The support we get from so many organisations like Arup this evening, our all-party parliamentary group that's pushing representation of women in transport onto the political agenda, and the many willing volunteers who keep pushing women in transport along and helping us to grow. Of course, there is always, always more to be done, but we're making huge steps in the right direction. So a great example of such generosity is from Cubic, Xantrail, TXM Recruit and Steer Group. That's meant this year we're able to really, really proudly launch our second mentoring scheme. So it's now an absolute huge pleasure to introduce Robert Nesbitt from the Rail Delivery Group, who has very, very kindly agreed to be our host for the evening. So I will hand over to his very capable hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. That's great. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We are not expecting a fire alarm this evening. So if you hear one, it means that you should take notice of it and just head out the doors that you came in and follow the green signs or the spiral staircase to get up and out. Also, when we move on to the panel discussion, we're inviting questions and answers. Now, you'll notice there is this little slip of paper on your chair. If you want to submit a question via the online system, then you can, if you'd rather not shout in the hall. Obviously, we would welcome you shouting in the hall. We want as many interventions as possible on a subject that obviously raises a lot of emotions, a lot of questions, and a lot of challenges for all of us in the industry. I had a look down the guest list before coming here, and already it looks as if so much has been achieved because so many of you are in so many good roles, you know, throughout the sector. But there still is what someone described to me the other day as a glass gantry. In the transportation industry, which needs to be shattered. I was sitting at the front row in an industry conference a while ago and turned around, and it was like looking in a mirror, like reflected and refracted middle-aged white men in blue suits, all of them just all the way up to the back of the room, and it was depressing, to be honest, because having come from the broadcast industry, where there are still issues of diversity in lots of areas, specifically class actually in broadcast journalism, both at Sky and the BBC, there are big problems. There are a lot of middle-class, privately school-educated people there that are telling a very specific story and not necessarily the bigger picture, as I think we found maybe when quite a few of us were taken by surprise with the Brexit vote. So let's today kind of celebrate achievements as we did in that video, and also touch on some of the themes that came out of it. You know, why it is important. It isn't just about, you know, kind of feeling good about ourselves or just the right thing to do, but why it's good for industry as well to get diversity in terms of voices in those meetings. So this is going to take a form of an expert panel who are all sitting there, and we'll throw the floor open to your questions to widen the debate still further. And then at the end of that, there are drinks and canapes and networking outside immediately afterwards. But first of all, I'm delighted to welcome Isabel Dedring, who's formerly the Deputy Mayor for Transport here in London. And however you travelled here tonight, Isabel's work for the city probably helped you get here, as she successfully delivered multi-billion-pound cycling, tube and road projects here in the capital. She's now the global transport leader from Arup, our generous host this evening. And I invite Isabel to the rostrum.
Right. Well, welcome, everybody. I definitely don't feel qualified to be offering answers, the right approach, solutions to this group of people. I just wanted to offer some personal observations. And the first thing I wanted to say was that this is a topic I feel really uncomfortable with. And the reason is that this is how I was raised. So those of you who weren't raised in the 1970s by intellectual parents in New York, won't be familiar with Free to Be You and Me, which is a record of feminist sort of ditties for children of the age of like 5. And they all have words like this in it, and it's all about, you know, like no one likes to do housework and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, My Dog is a Plumber is one of them, and it's all about the fact that, like, you know, how do you know that if the dog's a plumber, he must be a boy? So I had the huge privilege of being raised in a family where my gender was not an issue. In fact, out of principle, I was going to have to do something successful in a male industry almost to sort of show everybody that gender wasn't an issue. And that was the way that I was raised. And I was very, very lucky to be raised in that way. And so I never really felt comfortable talking about this because I didn't feel like it was relevant to me and to my experience. And in some ways, I still don't. But that's because I've been gone through a path in life, as you were just talking about, where I've been sort of privileged to be surrounded by a supportive environment. But then when I was at my last job at City Hall, I was in a lot of meetings that didn't look or feel like this. I was looking for a picture that looked like a lot of meetings I was in for hundreds and hundreds of hours at TfL and City Hall. And for sure there weren't this many women. There were not this many non-white people. And nobody was smiling. And a lot of people were really angry, often at what I had to say. And I started to think a lot more about being female. I think a lot of the reasons why, people challenged me, gaslit me in meetings, questioned my facts, tried to be very condescending to me over many years, despite having many fantastic experiences as well, was not necessarily because I was female, but because I was trying to challenge the status quo, the way that people were explaining why things were okay the way they were, like in 2011 when the Tube was performing quite poorly, and everyone was like, it's good enough, but basically was the undertone of the message, and the work at the ERU was one of the things that that I got a bit involved in at that time, which was just highlighted in that reel. So I'm not sure if it's because I'm female that I've kind of come to this topic, but I'm now trying to make myself more comfortable with it. So I just have some thoughts. One is we're kind of always evolving from where we are, right? We're like, oh, it's this percent, but let's make it this better percent. But Toyota, when they designed the zero fault approach to manufacturing, or the oil and gas industry, when they said that people shouldn't die anymore on oil rigs. It's not about going from 190 deaths to 180 deaths. It's about starting from zero. So why are we not designing for zero failure in the system? So we have 50% girls and 50% boys. So the outcome should be all throughout the chain. We should be seeing a 50-50 balance as we go through the system, and also in all walks of life within the transport industry. And we're not designing from that basis in terms of like proper root cause analysis. And I just put a little picture of the boards that are used at the underground and in other places in a lean manufacturing type approach, where you're trying to drive out every single marginal gain that you can in the system. That's not the way we're approaching this issue, not in this industry and not in any other industry either, as far as I can see. Part of that is about better understanding where we actually are and where are the problems and what's going wrong and what's going well. So if you look at transportation over here, actually, the employment of women in transportation has grown quite a bit over 50 years, maybe more than a lot of other sectors. And actually what I thought was really interesting about this chart is if you look at transportation's on the top in that red column, and actually at the entry level, number one, it's about 50% women coming into the industry, and that's just shrinking a lot more rapidly than it is in other industries. And Michelle alluded to that in the video just now, retention being a key thing. So what exactly is the problem we're going to be trying to solve here? What are we trying to focus on, and where are we going to get the biggest impact? Also, why are we doing this? That is not clearly articulated to people outside this room in the industry. Why is it a good thing to promote, whether that's diversity in terms of gender, race, where people came from in society, economically? And two examples of that are, we talk a lot about people in this room. We don't talk that much about the 80 to 90% of transport roles that are operational roles, where the representation of women is far lower than it is in our disciplines typically. We don't really clearly articulate why it is that one of the reasons to have more women in the workforce is because it reflects the population that it's serving, and that isn't well articulated, I would say, at the moment, and that sort of rationale. Where are we trying to get to? We're also not clear on that, really. We're saying, we had the first female London bus driver in 1974. This year, there's a great piece, actually, an initiative by Stagecoach. Why are only 6% of Stagecoach drivers women? That's almost 50 years later. I mean, poor Jill Viner, she must be just like so depressed. And then, if we roll forward another 44 years, that means we'll have 12% of stagecoach drivers being women. That can't be the right answer. So in my experience in a whole range of different things, I'm sure we've all had the same experience. If we don't set a clear target and say we're actually trying to deliver a 50% improvement in killed and seriously injured in London on the streets by this date, you're not going to get that result because you don't have that clarity of vision about where it is that you're trying to go. And part of that is about that root cause approach that I was talking about. And Joanna Jadrisiak, who's here this evening, and who's fantastic, who's in our city economics team, she helped me put some of this stuff together. So thanks again, Joanna. What we were looking at was if you start with 1,000 babies, how many of those are going to end up staying in the transport industry? This is highly scientific, based on a series of cobbled together facts, but it's probably broadly right. So we've got 65% of girls don't choose STEM at A levels. Of those, 70% don't choose STEM for higher education, so the ones that were left over. We know all of this stuff, but when we actually roll through the maths, we only end up with 12 of those girls out of the 1,000 left in the industry. So we don't count that because we're kind of counting people who already exhibited an interest, who are in the workforce, who are educated, et cetera. But when you actually look at that in terms of the population at large, that's a pretty tiny number. So one interesting question is, where can we get the most significant gains there? And if you were thinking about the Toyota car factory, that's the way they would be thinking about it. But we're just kind of firing loads of stuff out there into the universe and hoping that some of it's going to stick and some of it's going to work. And that's good. But can we try and kind of add analytical rigor and a sustained, concerted, somebody used the word purposeful the other day, more purposeful effort on this, I think is an interesting question. And if you did that, we don't have to read this, but what we're going to find is that there's some things that are really hard to fix. Cultural perceptions, we can try and change that, but I don't really know where we would start. There's other things that are really easy to fix. There are no female toilets at the bus stop where I have to change buses if I'm a bus driver. So we're just not trying to fix those in a concerted, purposeful way at the moment. Lots of people doing lots of good things, but it's not at the level that's needed to deliver a really transformational step change. It's going to deliver us the 12% bus drivers. But I think there's some fantastic opportunities, apart from being, really geeky and getting into the numbers and having the, zero fault found approach. It's actually also about harnessing some of the trends and the pressures in the industry. So things that seem like big problems in the transport industry. I just put up 2 examples here, but they're linked. In LA, they've got $120 billion to deliver a transformational metro program. It's going to try and shift people in LA out of the car into metro, and people voted for it. 75% of the population voted to get this program, and they're paying for it out of their sales tax. And there's a picture of the LA Metro, when it's all completed, and that's the ambition. But there's huge backlash about what we, maybe used to call regeneration, and now increasingly people are calling gentrification. And so the program's slowing down, stopping in many corridors because people don't want the metro. They don't want the development. They don't want the regeneration, so-called. Similarly, HS2 coming into Houston, there's still some very, very entrenched opposition to HS2, to the transformation of Houston within that community around the station. I know I live in Camden. That's still very alive and sitting out there. That could delay HS2. It could, lead to a suboptimal outcome at Houston. But these are all fantastic opportunities for new professions to get into the transport industry and help to solve these problems with new processes around engagement, new approaches to engaging the community. How do we use social media? How do we start with a blank piece of paper with the community and engage them then? Those are not disciplines and skills that really exist within the transport community at the moment. So is that an opportunity to bring more women into the industry? There's also big pressures around funding. The governor in New York declared a state of emergency because of the MTA falling apart. And there's not enough money for transport in the system. There never is, there never was. But increasingly, that's becoming more and more real. So how do we bring in economists? We've got one on the panel. People who know how to construct projects, build business cases, et cetera. Again, a new discipline. It exists in the industry, but there'll be more and more of those as we come up with more newfangled approaches to fund and finance these projects. And that's just one example that I've been involved with, both here and at City Hall, which is putting the A13 underground and building 5,000 to 10,000 houses on top of it. I still think it'll never happen, but somehow, amazingly, it's still alive, this project. And it's a fantastic project, but it doesn't just need engineers. It needs a much more holistic approach, and therefore a whole range of different professions and disciplines getting involved. And then the whole rise of digital, new technologies, new business models, whether that's virtual reality, whether that's reaching out to people and using customer data, whether that's new companies coming into the market, even whatever, this is one fact, but Uber's got much higher percentage of women working there than a lot of other companies. And you can say what you like about Uber, but that's an interesting factoid. And that's going to be the case for a lot of these newer business models that are coming into the industry, because they're coming out of a different part of they're coming out of a different industry, the tech industry and the digital industry. And the top left is a fantastic app that we've got in development, which is tracking people through the city. User interface is part of that. How do you engage with customers? How do you collect data? Totally different profession, of which transport 10 years ago didn't even have any of these people around. So I think there's some incredible opportunities that some of those trends create to bring new people into the industry generally, new perspectives, and as part of that we have women coming in as well. But it's taking that rigor and the discipline of engineering, of planning, and applying it to this problem in a more purposeful way that I think is still something that we need to put our minds to. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well. So take your seat in the panel. I will try this. Good. Yeah, that works. Terrific. So here are your panel, which Isabel has just joined. So let me start off with Aruba to start off with. Just tell us who you are and what you want to say.
So hi, I'm Aruba. I've just started my second year as a planning apprentice with Transport for London. And in all honesty, initially when I was asked to be a part of this panel, I was a little bit hesitant because, like Isabel said, this wasn't, being a year into my scheme, this wasn't something that I felt like I could, speak as an expert about. But compared to Isabel's experience, I came from a family of housewives. So, my mum was a housewife, my aunties, their friends. So I didn't sort of grow up around career women. This didn't mean that school wasn't important. You were told, you go and get good grades. However, it wasn't for you. It wasn't for your personal development. It was kind of more to then be seen as eligible for someone who had a great career and could provide. So yeah, it was a very different sort of mindset, and I think I personally got to a point where I decided that, I wanted to be well respected, well educated, but I wanted it for me and what I could bring for myself. So starting my apprenticeship, that was a massive part. It changed my mindset completely, and I kind of came in determined to prove a point that, I could do it and I could do it for myself. And I think joining the business and the rail industry as an apprentice really does change the kind of experience you have. The business has set a criteria that, your apprentice is here for you to develop them. And I noticed that compared to someone coming in a standard role, it was very different. We were not there to be ignored or spoken over in meetings, and you could feel that before being seen as male or female, I was seen as an apprentice. And this isn't me saying, everything's great and, we've got nothing left to do. And I fully accept that while as an apprentice right now with, no, I'm not in a leadership role, I haven't started my own family, I don't face the many constraints that people within that position face. And I know that these are things that personally I will one day have to deal with. I'm not taking away from the fact that these are real life issues. It's just personally within my time, it's not something that I have faced. I've got a story to share with you guys. I was on my train home one day, having a scroll through LinkedIn as many evenings, and I came across an article, and the title caught my eye straight away, and it starts off the characteristics of the most promotable women and why your hair colour may be key in climbing the corporate ladder. And the first sort of statement they made is that brunette is the optimal hair colour, and it goes on to say that, be attractive, but don't be too attractive, because then you won't be seen as capable anymore. And I'm reading this article and I'm stunned, as to how in 2018 that this is seen as, you know, the criterion, even if you take every single thing mentioned in this article is 100% true, this is how the real world is, why are we not challenging that and saying that, look, this is wrong, not telling people to go and dye your hair brown because you won't get promoted otherwise. But I think back to the nerves that I had a year ago when I was starting this apprenticeship, and reading this would have absolutely petrified me because I don't wear glasses and I'm, as you can see, not brown haired. So, but yeah, so it stunned me. So I've met great role models within my time who've really shown me that, you know, what you bring to the table is so much more than your appearance, and it's a lot more to do with who you are as a person and how you treat others. So no, I do not think we're there yet, but I think we've really nailed down how young people are coming into the industry and how they are being treated.
Aruba, thank you very much indeed. And now Chelsea.
Hi everyone. I'm an Associate Director at KPMG, so I am an economist by trade, so I advise largely public sector clients on the case for investing in transport infrastructure. And so I have my own personal experience. Again, I don't feel like I'm an expert. I've spent 10 years in consultancy, and at the moment, I'm in a professional services firm, which in itself has, a completely different culture, I'm sure, to other parts of the industry. I work in a firm where people are your product, and therefore, there's the starting point, I think, is completely different in terms of how we approach gender diversity. But I came from a household of, to start with, largely boys, and so again, there was almost a healthy competition, fight or flight mentality, and so that really pushed me. And so I guess I've always been competitive and ambitious in that sense. But interestingly, when I told them that I was doing this event, straight away the banter started and everyone started taking the mickey out of me. And yet at the same time, they will be the ones that are, championing me, talking, my dad will be talking to his friends. But there's this weird contradiction about this is sort of a slightly uncomfortable subject of, is it acceptable to just genuinely debate gender equality? So, I fell into the transport industry, and it was only when I got here, I thought, oh God, there's no other women here. And I had a piece of advice from a senior woman working in my firm prior to KPMG, and it really stays with me, where she said, just actually relish turning up to a meeting when everyone thinks you're there to take notes and you're there to lead the meeting, and that is such a good feeling, and actually prove people wrong. And so that's kind of really stuck with me. And also, I think that whole sort of importance of role models. Aside from her, actually, I've had really strong role models and senior people that have championed me, and interestingly, they've all been male. But they've, come with a certain perspective and really then sort of pushed me, and I think supported me in sort of what I wanted to do. And I think, that's really good when you start off in your career, and it really helps you excel through. And then you get to the point where you're sort of then, you're getting to the most senior levels, and then suddenly those people are also your peers. And then that, I've noticed there's a shift. So in terms of gender equality, I think actually if you'd asked me a couple of years ago, I would have said, I'd maybe have been more positive and saying, actually, yes, I feel, whereas actually I think the more senior you get, then sort of more challenging and the more work there is to do. So I do think there's a lot more to do. I think it's really important that everyone feels comfortable talking about the subject, and I really think it's important that we involve men in that conversation. So we are, at the moment, if we have an imbalanced gender split, then the only way we're going to make a transformational change is by getting the majority to really buy into what we're trying to do. So again, when I was asked to speak at this event, I'll be honest, at first I was also a bit hesitant because I'm not sure that necessarily always me speaking to a room full of women is, we're all speaking to ourselves. So I think there's absolutely an important role of this network outside of the workplace. I think in the workplace, it's really important that we involve men in the conversation and we don't alienate them, but actually we make them recognise this is sort of for the benefit of everybody. So that's my takeaway.
Thanks very much, Chelsea. Now, Sinead Trughill.
Hi, I'm Sinead. I am one of the HR directors at Network Rail. I think if Alison said that, Alison Rumsey is our group HR director. And I look after two parts of the business, which is safety, technical and engineering, and we write the standards in that team, and also health and safety as well is incorporated in that equality. But also I look after Group Digital Railway, which is our telecoms asset information services and the Digital Railway programme. So I've been with Network Rail for 5 years. I started as a senior HR business partner. I chose to join Network Rail at a lower level role because at the time that's the job that was available, but I really wanted to join the industry. And I have a huge fascination for trains, which is really odd, but I love it to bits, and the more I've been in the organisation, the more I love it even more. For me, I'm 53 years of age, so I've been working now for a number of years. And actually for me, the moment where I felt that how I was treated and spoken to was at an interview. I was looking to break that glass gantry. I wanted to go into a management role as a training manager in an automotive organisation I was working in at the time. I went along for the interview. I got the interview, and it was great. And I was sitting down, and they went through my CV as to why I felt I was the most appropriate person. And I was asked at that time, I was 30. Okay, Sinead, you're 30. You're married a year. It's likely you're going to go off and have a baby soon. Okay, I thought to myself for a moment, either I can really get really cross with this person, or actually I could ask him, why did he ask that question? So I asked him why he asked that question, because he said that he would be worried that I would go off and have a baby. I said, you're making a lot of assumptions there. For firstly, I'm just married, or thing, first just married. I may not ever be able to have a child. I don't know yet, I may not even want to have a child. So you're making a lot of assumptions for me in my life by just making judgments. And I'm really concerned when people do that. They make judgments about what somebody looks like, how they are, or how they may come across without actually really understanding. So for me, that's a huge thing. It's a huge value about being equitable for everybody and actually seeing people as to what they are. So anyway, I did get the job. I was hugely successful, I think, in the role, because I always got good feedback and thoroughly enjoyed it. But 3 years later, I did have my daughter, who's now 19. Why am I crying? Anyway, but it was don't ever, and I had 3.5 months off maternity leave, and I came back, and during that time, one of my German director at the time gave me a promotion. So actually, it does happen, and he's a wonderful person. He remains to be a mentor for me in that organisation, and always will be. So like you, I've had great mentors. My first job in the UK, I worked with a gentleman called John Amani. He's now in his 70s. He's somebody I would ring and call every 3 or 4 months. He's very much part of my life, and he's always been promoting me in my work and my studies and what I have done. So without John in my life and to support me, I would never have probably even gone to do my HR exams and to provide value in my organisation. I want to talk about also what we're doing in Network Rail. We're not great. In our roots, we are about 6% female representation in our roots roles, which that is awful. Karen and the team in our diversity inclusion team are doing some great work. When we started corporately and throughout the whole organisation, 6 months ago, we were 16%. I'm so pleased to say we're 1% up. We're now at 17%. So 20 by 2020 is a huge thing for us in our organisation. We're focusing on early engagement. We are working, trying to get to the root cause of what is going wrong. In my teams, I had an example this week of somebody who's gone for numerous interviews for a number of years and hasn't got the promotion that she wanted in our organisation. She decided 4 months ago that she was going to go out and actually try and find another job. She went for 4 interviews. She's been offered each 4 jobs. I am so sad I can't tell you about that. I need to understand what went wrong there. I really get cross when I see CVs coming in to my colleagues, and generally they're male. They've met somebody at an event or at a golf course or at the bar or somebody, and the CV comes in. And that person is then seen to be a preferred candidate. I hate when the relationship is started or commenced before we can actually run a really fair and transparent recruitment process. It really makes me cross. I think we really need to relentlessly look at our interview processes as well. We need to educate our line managers more and more in the areas of diversity in their workforce as to the why. Why is it necessary in our organisations? I know for a fact that when we have projects and teams which are more diverse in thought, that we actually land the project better, probably land it within budget sometimes, but actually it's a much higher quality project we work with. The risk and assurance, and all that diversity of thought is there. So I believe in it. I'm strongly an advocate of equality in my teams. But I always ask, what is going on? And as HR, we just don't take the data for what it is. We need to understand really what is going on there. So we've got a lot of work to do. And I know that we're very committed to do it as well. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Sinead. And finally, Mark.
Great. I'm Mark Lomas. I'm head of Equality, Diversity, Inclusion, EDI, at HS2. Just to answer the question, are we there yet? I suppose from my point of view, we're nowhere near it. I think is the honest answer. And I think we're in a position where if we don't get the business case for diversity now, I mean it's really quite obvious, I'd have thought. HS2 is a new organization. There's an opportunity to do things differently. And in some respects, we're making good progress. In some respects, things are difficult. Changing years of industry behavior inside an organization isn't always easy. But I think one of the problems that actually we've got to get over, and it's not easy to answer either, is that if we are talking about women advancing through the industry, bringing more women into the industry, to the majority group, that feels like losing. You're asking the turkeys to vote for Christmas. And human nature is not that way. We might think of it as equal opportunities, but that's not how the majority group generally feel about it. They feel, rightly or wrongly, that they're there on merit, whether it's because of sponsorship or who they met at the bar or connections. So we've got to unpick that idea that actually meritocracy exists in any form. Because if you believe that you run a fair recruitment process or you have a fair organization, this, that, and the other, the only logical outcome of that way of thinking is that these people need help. It's a deficit model. So I think that's really, really important to understand. I love the story about the person that went for 4 interviews and then got them all externally. That would be my advice too. You know, if you're not valued where you are, leave, because someone will value you. And when 100 people do that, then an organization takes note and goes, oh, wait, how did we lose all these people. What did we do wrong? One person is an inconvenience. Lose 100, that's no longer an inconvenience. That's a business problem. You can't really solve it without the men. They're both the problem and part of the solution as well. We have a gender balance network at HS2, primarily for that reason. I wouldn't say it's quite gender balanced, actually, yet. There are far fewer men than there are women. But I think we will get there, and I think, you know, when you were talking about your experience as an apprentice, actually we're seeing the younger men in the organization who expect and want to take things like parental leave, engaging in that far more. But we still have, all across the industry, to your point around zero design failure, we have design failure everywhere. Pretty much all major construction contracts have no provision for paying for flexible working. We did research with Mumsnet, said flexibility is the biggest barrier. Most professional services contracts say you have to be at the nominated office in order to get paid. So we say we want to bring women into the industry, and parents, and then we make it difficult to do that. The whole industry publishes role schedules, which is how you procure consultants. Basically, it's a mini job description is what it is. It says the director of the project and gives you a little description. And it often says things like 20 years experience and £100 million budget management. Now, you would never do that in recruitment, but because it's procurement of people, that's permissible. And that is all across the industry. HS2, I think, at the moment, is the only organization that doesn't do that. The only one. So how are we supposed to get progression, development, if the way that we're procuring support limits that? And then you do give a great excuse to people who go, well, I can't have an apprentice, can I? Because even the most junior role in the contract requires 5 years experience. Sorry, I can't give you any of our women at director level because none of them have been there for 20 years. So we have failure everywhere. I like the phrase that sort of, you know, evolution has utterly failed. Let's go for a bit of revolution and see what happens.
Great, thank you very much. Let's just start off very quickly, Aruba. I mean, in terms of attitudes of people that you work with, how surprised are they that you are doing what you're doing? I mean, just give it, you know, for someone, I've just turned 50. You're obviously a lot younger than me. Just tell me whether attitudes have changed, shifted. What are your colleagues like?
I think it really depends in terms of what the environment is. You know, if you're in a meeting or, you know, you're having a professional discussion with someone, compared to if you're out for team drinks and then you're having a conversation about these things, you know, like there's so many perceptions around apprentices on a whole, and you know, sometimes when you're a female apprentice, and you know, I remember once I'm telling someone, you know, I'm going for my very first site visit, and they're like, oh yeah, just don't mind if anyone makes any sort of comments, and you know, you're saying that to someone who hasn't actually even been out there yet.
What kind of comments did they mean?
I mean, I think it's just that whole it's a man's world kind of thing that, you know, you'll go in there and you'll be made to feel uncomfortable. And, you know, I've done site visits and I've spent time on site, and in my personal experience, it hasn't happened to me. But when you're saying that to someone straight away, I think it sets the expectation that, oh, okay, I'm going to go there and something bad is going to happen to me today. So, which I don't think is the right way to be in these situations.
Does that surprise you, Isabel, to hear that those kind of attitudes happening now?
No, it reminds me of, oh, I need a...
Oh, yeah.
Hang on,
Sorry.
no, that's okay.
You're
Just
right.
give it to me, that's all right. Yeah. It reminds me of when we went down to into the Crossrail tunnels, and I was with, I can't remember her name right now, but it was a very senior woman at Bechtel, who was running like a huge chunk of the Crossrail 1 delivery. And the guy, there was a guy in his sort of, I was going to say an older guy in his 50s, I didn't say that. There was a guy probably in his late 50s, so that's really old. So you're good, And he was, there's like all these sort of ladders to get down to the tunnel because the platform's not there yet, whatever. And so she was coming back up the ladder. She's been working in the industry for like 30 years. And he was like, oh, be careful there, love. And she said, but it was super nice. But it's just like, hold on, you wouldn't say love to a guy who is that age. But it's not meant in a bad way. But it's this very tiny drip, 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 drip like that is insidious, and it trickles into the woodwork over time. And she said, she was like, can I just point out that you've called me love, and that's not appropriate in a work environment. You could say that to your daughter or your granny or whatever, but it's not appropriate. And she's nice as pie. And the poor guy was like, almost fell over, but because he was just like, what are you even on about? But it made me think a lot about like, should you do that? Does that help? Should you not do it? I don't know. I don't know the answer. But the problem is that I think we've moved from sort of really big, obvious problems. There are no female bus drivers. That's kind of an easy problem to solve. It's like, let's have one, but it's hard. But, it's kind of pretty obvious what the problem is. Whereas now, I think it's very, very insidious. It's like 1% little things. So anyway, I don't have the answer, but that's my observation.
Right, let's throw it open to the floor. Anybody got any questions? Lady at the back there in the pink shorts. There's a microphone coming to you, so.
Michelle Jackson from Transport Focus. I organise a meetup for transport assistants and coordinators, and we're assistants who are across all modes. And most, unsurprisingly, it's mostly women. And I know these women they're so capable, they're at the top of their game, and their skills are so transferable. But like Chelsea mentioned before, there are lots of them go in there and they're taking minutes and making cups of tea, but they have skills way beyond that. And we usually talk about how do we then change that? What opportunities can we get? What advice can I give to my peers to help us go from making cups of tea, taking the minutes, to taking the meeting? That's my question.
Quite broad. Sinead.
Yeah, I think organisationally it's similar to, you need to be able to provide those career pathways. We've done that within our engineering part of the business and health and safety and well-being part of the organisation. So all our jobs across engineering in particular, just at the moment, I need to go and look at other areas, but at the moment within engineering, we can provide what those career paths could be like for somebody who was aspirationally wanting to do a role. I'd similarly like to do the same in HR as well. I'm the head of profession for HR, so I'm looking to do that for HR at the moment as well. So we can start looking at what the opportunities are and actually how do you get there. So what do you need for that role? And again, we need to be, make those quite neutral and open up the opportunities. It's providing also, for me, it's role models across the organisation, so people will see that particularly in Network Rail, I think at the moment we've got a lot of very capable and sort of lots of really great women in senior roles across the organisation, which is great advocates and actually are great supporters as well. But we've equally got some great men in the organisation who are great supporters and really trying to help us with our journey as well. So everybody's behind it. But and I'm delighted also, just to finally want to talk about apprentices, roles. We've got loads of people doing workplace apprenticeships as well in Network Rail. So you can be working and you can be provided with, you can have the opportunity to start an apprenticeship as well. So there's great opportunities opening up for everybody. So you will no longer have to make the tea. But you can always say, no, I'm not making the tea, it's your turn.
Anybody else want to jump in?
I always say, help yourself to tea and coffee. That's the first thing I say in a meeting.
I think it's a good point, though. If you look at, go back to your organization, right, and download a job description, and I'm willing to bet you that 70% of those criteria are about experience of having done the job that you're applying for. And therefore, if you've not done that job, regardless of whether you have the transferable skills, regardless of all the nonsense that organizations talk about, how they want it and this, that, and the other, actually, the recruitment system is not predicated for that. Finding your way around that is difficult and a barrier. So I'm a huge believer that actually the entire business of recruitment is fatally flawed. From top to bottom. Absolutely flawed. And I think that is a major barrier, because you're not, well, very few times are you recruited on your skills and what you can do. 70% of the criteria about have you done it before. And that's a huge barrier. I mean, you can lie on your CV. Lots of people do that, I understand. I wouldn't advocate for that at all.
He said quickly. Thank you very much, Mark. I'm just going to take one from the floor and then one from the screen as well, because people are using the system. This is the best I've seen it work, so this is great. I'm just going to take the second one here. This one's for you, Isabel. Research shows that when women want to progress to very senior roles, negotiate compensation, or show ambition, they are viewed negatively by their peers and managers. It's the opposite for males, who are encouraged to be ambitious. Isabel, or rest of the panel, have you ever experienced anything like that, and how did you get past it?
I think it's sort of like what I was saying earlier. I don't know, and it sort of links to this whole thing about would it not be more beneficial to link gender to the general question of diversity and your point, diverse teams in the broadest meaning. You come from different economic backgrounds, different professional disciplines, male, female, whatever skin color, etc. Those kinds of teams produce better results. So that's proven, the converse of that is that I think when I've sort of had various people say, that's really bad that you've just gotten that job, it's usually because they knew what I was about to sort of try and do, and they knew that it was coming their way. So I like to deliver change. I like to just say that this isn't good enough, but that's great because we're going to make it better. And the way you achieve change is by being honest and straightforward, but being incredibly persistent. And when somebody says for the 73rd time no, you have to be the 74th time when they've just given up and they're like, oh, fine, just do the thing. And that's a lot of this is about, sort of, so I think it's sort of probably more those sorts of characteristics that have when, people kind of tried to hold me back or question what I'm doing. I've never felt that it was a gender-based thing. I've always felt that it was but then that's the kind of environment that I've been in. I think there's other environments, like if you're, trying to get a job as a bus driver and keep a job as a bus driver, and you want a rota where you can pick your kid up from school every day, a lot of the rostering isn't designed around family life. It might finish at 4 o'clock. Well, you can forget picking your kids up after school at that point, by the time you get home.
Lady in the blue shirt at the back.
Hi, Toby Sariki from Transport for London. I think in order to increase women's intake into senior roles, men need to do more unpaid labour work and to take on higher levels of paternity leave and to request paternity leave. So how can we get more men to do more of the unpaid labour work and to actually take the paternity leave as well?
Very good question, and one that is reflected online as well. Mark, do you want to take this? How do you encourage men to take the paternity leave to which they are entitled?
That's a really good question. I don't have a good answer, basically, to that. I think what I've observed, and there's nothing scientific about this observation whatsoever, is that the younger members of our workforce, if I say 35 and under, who are parents, who are dads, are far more likely to request to do it. That it seems generationally there is a bit of a shift there. I think a lot of it depends on your boss, your line manager, whether you want to. Some of these are personal choices. So you can have the policy, you can promote it, you can make it seem like it's the company culture to do. How you make people do it is very, very, very difficult.
You are assuming that there is a culture there already, though. That's the hurdle
There is
that we have
definitely
to
a
get
culture.
over.
There's
Is
definitely a culture there.
you know, it's a legal right. Is it publicised? Do the parental leave arrangements, are they the same as maternity leave? So until there isn't that awareness, and then there's also a stigma attached
I think that's exactly what I mean.
to doing it, and so until we make it the norm culturally.
I think if you look at HS2, we're 1,500 people, right? It's a small population of people. About 70% of those are 65% are men. And if you take the sort of more senior grades, you're talking about a population, really, of 500, 600 men. Now, awareness is not difficult. You can pick up the phone, find an answer. That's easy. For an organization, network, rail size, or something much bigger. So I personally, I don't see awareness as an issue. The asking, yes, I think you're right. There is still culturally a stigma, definitely. But I think generationally, my observation is the younger fathers are much more likely to say, I'm having my paternity leave, I want to do shared parental leave, and are much more likely to ask about their rights and expect, they have an expectation of being able to do it. How you change it?
I was just going to say, I think there's a kind of wider point that you're making, which is around, I've got 2 boys, and my husband's great, does loads of stuff, whatever. I have probably the ultimate ownership of the childcare issue, but I'm in the very lucky position of having a partner who's, doing loads of stuff and having money to solve the problem, right? So we're lots of people. There are a lot of other things that we could do to ease the childcare burden and the home burden. That's one of them. But there's loads of other things that have been done in other industries, in other countries. They're not complicated. They're not cultural, which is very difficult to solve sometimes. It's just things like offering childcare in the work environment. So there's a nursery on the ground floor. So if there's a problem, you can pick up your kid because you're right there. I mean, there's 1,000 things that we can do, but we're not pursuing a lot of those things that are maybe easier than trying to change people's fear of asking for leave, which is also a good thing to do.
Aruba, you're nodding?
I think just going back to, is talking about it and raising awareness, is that enough? I was having a conversation with someone the other day. We just had a diversity moment, which is where, there's a topic that, you select, a certain amount of time, everyone talks about it. And the person leading it had been in the industry a long time. And he turned around and said, I remember 5 years ago when we had to have a safety moment and everyone turned around and was like, oh, well, what's this? And he's like, now it's the norm. We can talk about safety like it isn't, it's not a big issue. So I think talking about it and actually allowing those conversations to happen and saying that, it's awkward right now, but if we carry on working through this together, it won't be, is really important. So I think, talking about it definitely does make a difference.
And on the subject of what else we can do, because we're talking about a lot of issues, but what we can actually do ourselves, even if we're not in a senior position to affect behaviours. This question here is a woman in a junior position. What can I do to support women from other minority groups, age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion, sexual orientation, etc.? So Sinead, if you're not a manager, but you're in a junior position, how can you affect behaviours in the company that you work in?
Firstly, you can join one of our staff networks, and you can actually get involved with that. You'll learn and work with people across the different grades and more senior people. You will form relationships and friendships, and you're there to ask help and support about how you can help people to do that. We've got how many staff networks do we actually have? 6. And in each staff network has got is for different reasons, but they are opportunities for people to offer that support and to get involved. And we also do a lot of work with STEM as well, so that's really important. So you can give something back regardless of your seniority in the organisation as well. So it's a really good opportunity. Yeah.
Mark, have you got any tips if you're in a junior position? What could you do to change behaviours?
Strength in numbers. I'm a real believer in that. If you're in a junior position, actually it doesn't matter what position you're in, but particularly if you're in a junior position, you know, take the time to engage with your colleagues, participate in the things that happen in the organization. Have your say. If you have your say and the organization doesn't do anything about it, then that's the organization's fault. If you don't have your say and you don't say anything, that's your fault, because you can't change what you don't necessarily know about. So I'm a fan of staff networks for that reason. Strength in numbers, multiplier of that voice. And I think, you know, we can have the debate about diversity and inclusion, whatever, but the issues are kind of the same. You know, there are tweaks here and bits of difference, but broadly, the issues of access, progression, flexibility. And if you have flexible working, it's great for disabled people too. So lots of the diversity issues cut across the spectrum. So, you know, one of the things we like to say at HS2, is I like to say anyway on that, is what I want you to do is participate. I don't need to live in a good news echo chamber. I actually need you to say what's wrong, what you need to change, what you want to change, and then we try and make that happen. You can't do it all the time, you know, but if you don't have your say and we don't know, we can't change. So I think that would be my advice. Participate, engage, get people around you engaged in the issues, and multiply the voices, and it becomes really powerful.
Chelsea, have you got something to say?
No, I agree with all of what's been said. I think we've done that actually. There's been a shift within our group at KPMG where, well, the general ethos of moving away from we will do this in terms of encouraging diversity inclusion to I. And it sounds like a cliche, and at first I thought, oh, it's a bit cheesy. But actually, it's like if every person doesn't feel comfortable, doesn't feel like they can make, you know, an actual contribution, and if it's in your day-to-day role, just acting as a mentor to your peers or your more junior colleagues, then, you know, you can't just sit on the sidelines and throw rocks. You've got to, even if it is small steps, taking ownership.
Thanks, Chelsea. Sorry, this is so interesting, and there are so many different questions. We're running out of time. We've got time for one more before we go out into the hall and have canapes and drinks, and we can obviously talk more about these subjects. So the very last question at the back there, please, in the black shirt.
Jo Lucas from Co-Create. I'm actually taking it slightly backwards to the question before. I really like what Mark talks about in terms of the need to change the system. It's not really the people we're changing. And I feel a lot of the conversation has been around changing the people and how you work your way through and how you deal with the system as it currently stands. And I get that because we're not changing the system anytime soon. But I'd just like to know, we've got representations from some pretty major organisations here. Can I check whether your maternity and your paternity pay match each other? Do you give equal amounts of money to your men and your women when it comes to flexible working? We talk a lot about what we do in the workplace and making sure the money matches. Do you do that at the moment?
Yes, but it's not equal amounts of time.
So they get paid the same amount of money on their paternity leave?
But it's not the same amount. So paternity leave, we've got like the 2 weeks.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Not 3 months?
Yeah.
Not 6
With
months?
there's shared parental leave, and you can do that. And there are other policies that you can take advantage of. But it is like cobbling it together.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to sit here and say it's perfect at all. It is a little like cobbling it together. Making those policy changes, actually, and we're about to make a whole bunch of changes. Interestingly, the demand for that hasn't come up yet. Changes to maternity practice have come up. Changes to what we do around paternity hasn't been such a loud noise at the moment.
Does that mean we don't give men enough voice in that area?
It's like any business. If you go to the senior level and say, right, 3 people think we need to change the policy, they're like, yay. You know, if you go, 300 people think we need to change, oh, okay, we're going to listen. So I would say, yes, it's a little cobbled together at the moment. It's definitely an area for improvement. But again, when you're a smallish organization of the size of HS2, changing a policy framework within 6 months, a year is very possible. When you're a much larger organization, it can be harder. I'd like to have a better answer to that question in a year's time, actually. It's a good question.
Good question. Yeah, good question. Well, just to end, I mean, Network Rail, I mean, what are your policies on paternity?
Parity, we pay the same. Yeah.
Okay.
And the reason that came about was because we actually had a claim, and we thought, this is wrong. Let's put it right. So we changed the system.
Okay, and on that inspiring last note, that's good. The system was changed. I mean, obviously lots of very complicated and chewy issues with no obvious direct answers, but lots of hints, lots of shards of light about where best practice is, what we can all do individually, even if we're not senior managers. Inspire the next generation by becoming STEM ambassadors is one way forward. Offering work experience to young women. If you're in a position to offer work experience to women, then do so. A call to men to be allies as well. Your colleagues may well surprise you with their attitudes. Join staff networks, as we've been hearing, and encourage your managers to set flexible working as much as possible. Strength in numbers, have your say. It's that old thing in the environmental movement, isn't it? The power of one. That we can make a difference if we club together, but if no one comes forward, then no differences are going to be made. But thank you so much for coming along. Thank you to our fantastic panel, and drinks outside afterwards.